Urgent. This happened while you were sleeping. They came for Putin. Moscow is trembling. Z propaganda is changing its tune right before everyone's eyes. Trump delivered a harsh verdict to Russia. The death knell has already sounded. Shock. The Kremlin has lost its trump card. The heart of the oil empire couldn't withstand the blows. Naval drones forced the Black Sea to take revenge on Russia. Epic footage. Another enemy aircraft down. The dictator's air force is barely breathing. Crimea is on the line. Explosions that forced Russians to urgently flee the peninsula. Hours are hinting at the start of a special operation, Ukraine's triumph. A new drone is already on the horizon. This is a real trump card in our hands. Just the mention of it makes Russians' knees buckle. And all of this happened right now. Hello, I'm Darina Hotsakalo and we're getting started. A black mark for Moscow and a real disaster. Panic is growing in the Russian information space. While Russian federal TV channels are trying to find at least some failures by the US in the war against Iran, Z propagandists are sounding the alarm. They claim that the next target of the West's operation could be the Russian capital itself.
One question worries me. When will they come for us? Or have they already started? And we understand that when they talk about Iran, they're also talking about Russia. They will treat us the same way now, striking Russia even more harshly.
Kremlin mouthpieces are openly saying live on air that this is the end of Moscow's illusions. The next step by the US will be fatal for Russia. And it's all because of the war against Ukraine.
The killing of Khamenei is a verdict for Russia. There's nowhere to run, warns Tsargrad, the outlet of Orthodox oligarch Malafeev. Today, Russia finds itself in strategic isolation, writes the article's author. While our soldiers have been stuck in the trenches for 5 years, the Americans have moved on to methods that solve global problems in a single day. Either Russia remembers that power does not belong only to the hegemon, or it will be next on the list of operations.
Doom really is inevitable. Against the backdrop of decisive US actions, the Kremlin's multi-step geostrategists look simply helpless. And even in Russia itself, this is acknowledged. Z futurologist Maxim Kalashnikov openly says all this ostentatious grand strategy of Moscow actually looks pathetic.
Instead of decapitating the enemy and paralyzing his rear, thousands of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones have gone to waste. Well, now Trump will wipe your nose, you cunning schemers.
Those who just yesterday were praising Putin are now crying out that supposedly the Russian leadership was actually counting on Washington forcing Ukraine to agree to Putin's terms. However, those hopes did not come true. Moscow is in despair, and Putin doesn't have much time left. The end of dictatorships is almost always the same, either handcuffs or the end. Urgent. The Kremlin has lost its trump card. Something terrible has happened in the Black Sea. Putin's armies are in ruins. Ukrainian drones in a swarm broke into the Sivash drilling platform and destroyed enemy units, attacking both from the sea and from the air.
As a result of the combat operations by maritime unmanned drones and aerial unmanned vehicles, enemy command and communication assets were struck, and significant losses were inflicted on enemy personnel.
This platform was used as an observation post, a communication relay point, and a site for deploying electronic warfare and short-range air defense systems with the purpose of controlling strike drones flying toward Odessa and Mykolaiv regions. It also became the place where a Russian Ka-27 helicopter met its end. The landing evidently did not go as planned. There's chaos on the Crimean coast as well. Social media is exploding with alarming news. The Russians can't handle the tension. Drones flew straight into the electrical substation and didn't leave the power supply a single chance.
It hit the PS 330 kV Ostrovskoye near the village of Ostrovskoye in the Pervomaisky district. This is the most important electrical distribution hub on the peninsula.
In addition, a fire broke out on the peninsula in the Krasnogvardeysky district not far from the Vesely airfield. The airfield, which had been inactive, was actively put to use by the Russians after the war began, and it seems they already regret it.
The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that supposedly 56 UAVs were shot down over Crimea during the night. But we know what they're actually using to shoot them down.
This is sensational. Ukraine never ceases to amaze. A new Avenger enters the arena of aerial combat, the bird drone. Putin's soldiers, get ready. A Ukrainian-made strike quadcopter is already breaking into the front lines.
It has a fiber optic control channel. It can carry out combat missions at a depth of almost 50 kilometers. At present, this is a record-breaking range of engagement among all codified drone models of this type.
Ukrainian engineers have achieved the impossible. The new drone has a well-balanced design which allows it to maneuver easily during flight. It operates both day and night and is not afraid of bad weather or even strong gusty winds. Its combat payload is sufficient to strike enemy infantry, firing positions, bunkers, as well as vehicles and light armored equipment. A swarm of drones with such capabilities is something Putin's war machine simply cannot withstand. And while the enemy tries to catch up with us, Ukraine continues to move forward rapidly. The armed forces of Ukraine have officially approved the concept of using artificial intelligence on the battlefield. To this end, a separate unit has even been created to test new AI technologies directly in wartime conditions. In fact, the Ukrainian army is gradually transitioning to the format of future warfare, where algorithms, data, and intelligence systems work alongside military force. It should be noted that artificial intelligence is already being actively used by the soldiers of the 7th Corps of the Air Assault Forces.
For example, machine vision on drones enables target recognition and data transmission during reconnaissance operations. While the quality of the image depends on the sensors, identifying a moving object as a specific target, such as an armored vehicle, is already the work of AI.
New. Europe is moving into a new power game. Poland is preparing a powerful nuclear argument that could shift the balance in the region. Warsaw is demonstrating its readiness to act tough. This signal is already heading straight toward the Kremlin. Sensational news: France is putting forward the idea of a joint nuclear shield for Europe. What exactly are European leaders planning, and why is this news causing such a stir? Let's figure it out now. The continent of Europe is currently strengthening its nuclear security measures. Poland is preparing a historic alliance with France that is set to change the nuclear map of Europe. Prime Minister Donald Tusk stated that Warsaw no longer wants to remain a bystander when it comes to matters of strategic security.
Poland is well aware that the threat from the Russian Federation is quite significant. This threat is primarily due to the Kaliningrad region. This threat is also caused by potential risks coming from the territory of Belarus. And Poland, unwilling to modernize and reform itself, just like the North Atlantic Alliance, NATO, is primarily chasing after a placebo effect.
Negotiations regarding a possible format of cooperation are being conducted with a number of European countries interested in strengthening collective defense. Earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron proposed expanding the French nuclear deterrence system by opening it up to partners. It is expected that the topic of nuclear cooperation will become one of the key issues at the summit in Paris.
The number of countries that will at least want to have a base on their territory where the nuclear weapons of France, the United Kingdom, or the United States could be stationed will, of course, increase. And countries like Germany could even afford their own nuclear program and the creation of their own nuclear weapons. Therefore, of course, the number of such countries will only continue to grow. But I will repeat myself. Nuclear weapons are a destructive tool which, despite all their destructiveness and menace, are nothing more than a placebo effect in a conventional war.
The French initiative envisions various forms of cooperation, ranging from joint exercises and demonstrations of capabilities to the deployment of France's strategic aviation near its allies. In Paris, they believe that the distribution of such forces will complicate the calculations of a potential adversary and strengthen the overall level of Europe's defense.
This is a reputational blow, and it will put pressure on Russia simply by the fact that countries which previously had not considered possessing their own domestically produced nuclear weapons or deploying nuclear weapons from a third country on their territory are now thinking about it. This is the effect of the entire geopolitical strategy that the Kremlin has chosen in recent times.
Putin has been blackmailing the whole world for years with the threat of a nuclear strike because he has no other levers of influence left. Earlier, the dictator accused France and the United Kingdom of preparing to transfer nuclear weapons to Ukraine.
The Russian army is currently experiencing a series of significant setbacks and defeats on the ground in Ukraine. And at the very same time, a sense of nuclear fever is rapidly intensifying and growing across Europe, where more and more sovereign countries now want to possess their own nuclear weapons. This situation represents a total and absolute strategic failure of the Kremlin's entire long-term foreign policy approach. Well, of course, this will put reputational pressure on him because the Kremlin won't be able to do anything about it. It won't be able to stop it in any way. All it can do is watch this process unfold.
France has the fourth largest nuclear arsenal in the world. Earlier, Macron announced the renewal of the nuclear doctrine. Paris plans to increase the number of nuclear warheads and will also stop publishing detailed information about its stockpiles.
There are official figures which may be counted in thousands of missiles or in tens or hundreds. But again, all of this is such highly classified information, and only what is beneficial for these governments to reveal makes it to the surface. No one really knows how many combat-ready warheads each country actually has. That's very important, combat-ready warheads. How many have been produced, how many are in storage, and how many are on active duty.
Macron also announced that the first French third-generation nuclear missile submarine will set out to sea in 2036. Urgent. Russia has pushed Ukraine to the limit. The cauldron has been ignited. A push towards Transnistria. Emergency combat readiness. The armed forces of Ukraine are one step away from liberating the Moldovan enclave. An explosion of rage could happen live on air. Something terrible is coming. Putin covered his face with his hands. His influence is melting before our eyes. The army is waiting for the final signal. You need to be the first to know. Russian troops in Transnistria pose a potential destabilization threat to Ukraine, so Kyiv should keep its forces near the border. This was stated by former Moldovan Defense Minister Vitaly Marinuta.
For Ukraine, Russian troops in Transnistria are no longer an inert factor. They are seen as a potential platform for destabilization. Ukraine should keep its troops near Transnistria just in case. Even with limited capabilities, their significance remains political and strategic.
The so-called Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic is an unrecognized quasi-state on the territory of Moldova. It covers the entire Moldovan part of the left bank of the Dniester and has a small enclave on the right bank. Despite not being recognized, this pseudo-republic is governed by its own authorities and relies on units of the so-called Russian peacekeepers. This is the only thing that still allows Transnistria to exist.
Like most other frozen conflicts in the post-Soviet space, Transnistria was created by the Russians with the aim of exerting constant pressure on both Moldova and Ukraine.
Transnistria, with a limited Russian contingent, has remained a territory uncontrolled by Moldova for many years.
That is to say, on one hand, of course, it's a way to constantly put pressure on Moldova, but on the other hand, it's the presence of Russian troops literally in the very south of Ukraine, close to the strategic city of Odessa.
Vitaly Kulik, head of the Laboratory for Countering Disinformation at KNAU, explains that hostile intelligence agencies operate in Transnistria, organizing terrorist attacks in Ukraine. In particular, they recruit citizens through social networks. Transnistria, occupied by Russia, has become a potential threat to Ukraine.
Since 2014, Russia has used Transnistria as a staging ground for carrying out information sabotage and has even sent in sabotage groups. In 2014, they targeted Budjak, and in 2022, they attempted to land troops in Odessa. During Euromaidan, representatives of pro-Russian political forces fled to Transnistria.
According to the expert, the most toxic pro-Russian Telegram channels are administered precisely in Transnistria, and they recruit Ukrainians to commit terrorist acts for money. They find young people and instruct them on how to make explosives. Such operations are directed by officers of the GRU or FSB.
This is dangerous. There are about 1,500 Russian soldiers stationed there who can cause problems. There are also 8,000 servicemen of the so-called Transnistrian army and another 1,000 people from the special services. This could be a potential threat. They have a multiple rocket launcher system, 6 tanks, armored personnel carriers, small arms, and they know how to manufacture them.
In December, the media reported that the threat of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups infiltrating Ukraine from the territory of Transnistria had increased. Supposedly, this was how the Kremlin wanted to divert some of Ukraine's resources to counter threats from the territory of the so-called PMR. It was noted that mobilization measures were intensified in the territory of Moldova temporarily occupied by Russia, the so-called PMR. Reservists are being called up to the military formations of the unrecognized republic, and weapons are being taken out of storage at the depots. In addition, according to some reports, drone production has been set up in the territory of the PMR to serve the interests of the Russian occupiers, and drone operator training centers have been opened.
Therefore, of course, it is in Ukraine's interest to eliminate this enclave, which has been festering for a long time and which must be dealt with. That is why Ukraine fully supports the territorial integrity of Moldova.
The withdrawal of Russian troops from Transnistria is possible, but it will require some time.
Ukraine is interested in ensuring that ultimately all of this is eliminated. Of course, Ukraine cannot do this on its own. This must be done primarily by Moldova using various methods, but Ukraine can provide all possible support. That is ultimately Ukraine's strategic goal is the elimination of Transnistria as a phenomenon, so that there are neither Russian troops nor Russian influence nor pro-Russian forces there.
A complete resolution of the conflict is expected after the end of Russia's war against Ukraine. This was stated to Moldovan media by the ambassador of Moldova to Ukraine, Victor Kirill.
This is achievable. We must remain optimistic. It is obvious that the final resolution of this conflict largely depends on how the catastrophic war unleashed by the Russian Federation against Ukraine ends. But at the same time, we have our own internal agenda.
Regardless of the circumstances, there will be no outbreak of armed conflict in Transnistria, and Ukraine will take all necessary steps to guarantee that this geopolitical entity is completely and permanently dismantled.
The issue of withdrawing Russian troops from Transnistria remains key to the security of both Moldova and Ukraine, but this issue cannot be resolved quickly. It has a clear logic and real prerequisites for gradual progress. The process is real, although lengthy.
Naturally, the question arises, how can this be done? So far, the main methods are economic pressure, but is it possible to achieve this without any military operation? And will Ukraine participate in this military operation? All of this remains a question for now. At the moment, nothing of the sort is being planned. However, as the saying goes, one should never say never. In any case, Transnistria is indeed a highly significant and strategically perilous region for Ukraine, so Ukraine will always be deeply interested in completely eliminating this potential threat.
Here we go. The world is being hit by a new oil storm. Iran is threatening to block tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and is essentially blackmailing the global market. Tensions instantly rose, but then there was a sudden twist. A single move by Donald Trump shook the market and caused oil prices to plummet. Moscow is getting nervous. Russian economists are striking back and the room for maneuver is visibly shrinking. Events are unfolding rapidly. Don't miss the main thing.
The war in the Middle East continues. Oil prices are rising. This obvious trend has dominated the headlines of all major global publications since the beginning of the week. At the same time, a new statement from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps caused quite a stir the day before. They announced that they would attack oil pipelines, which would lead to prices rising to $200 per barrel. At the same time, Iranian militants are threatening to fire on every ship passing through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's main oil transportation routes. At present, an attempt to block the Strait of Hormuz for an extended period is unlikely. You can see this in the price dynamics. Prices have risen by 10%, but not sharply because such a blockade is not beneficial to anyone. The strait could be blocked either if certain units of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps decide to do so on their own, or as a final scenario by the Iranian government if it believes it can no longer win the war. At the same time, even today, passage through the strait is already significantly complicated. Companies do not want to insure cargoes traveling along this route, and dozens of ships are accumulating at its mouth. The markets reacted instantly. An increase in petroleum product prices is already being observed worldwide. However, since the beginning of the week, the trend has changed, experts say. Instead of panic, a tough calculation set in, during which it became clear that, for now, there is enough oil in the world.
The market took a look, considered, and said, first of all, this is all temporary. So we said the market participants, the speculators on the market say, at the beginning of this Monday, we pushed prices up to about $81 per barrel, and then we watched what was happening and brought it all down. 78 no more. Perhaps this will be a new kind of corridor that takes all the risks into account.
At the same time, Russia immediately tried to take advantage of the price increase. Looking ahead, let's say it was in vain, and here's why. First of all, the Russian Federation also has enormous problems with transporting its raw materials. Long-range Ukrainian strikes have already destroyed or damaged 7 out of 8 oil-loading rigs in the key port of Novorossiysk. Western sanctions pressure continues, as does the fight against Putin's shadow fleet.
There are various measures that can reduce their export capabilities. In addition to our own long-range responses, there are also certain measures, sanctions on tankers, sanctions on companies, sanctions on cargo transport entities, sanctions on captains, on crews, and the possibility that these tankers will then not be released.
Moreover, as experts point out, Russia cannot increase oil production, and therefore will not be able to take advantage of the temporary price increase and sell large batches.
The volume of oil production in Russia is decreasing and will continue to decrease. It will no longer be possible to increase it, no matter what. And from the point of view of, there will probably be some increase in oil and gas revenues. That is, there will be a decline, but not as severe as was anticipated. Right now, starting from December compared to the same months last year, December, January, February, oil and gas revenues in Russia have fallen by half, by 50%, and they will continue to fall.
The Kremlin will indeed receive a little more than was planned for its current shipments. However, after the situation in the Middle East stabilizes, the drop in oil prices and the volumes that Russia is able to sell will lead to a massive collapse in the Russian Federation, which, by the way, Russian financiers are already openly talking about.
If we look, for example, at the calculations of various Russian economists, including those close to the Russian ruling elite, such as the Center for Macroeconomic Analysis, they generally say that all other things being equal, if there is any growth, it will be around 0.5 to 0.8% in the Russian Federation. So therefore, it's not really the case that some influx of money, so to speak, will pour in for Putin today.
It's worth noting here that Russian oil, which is the foundation of Putin's regime, despite all the market fluctuations, hasn't really increased much in price. Meanwhile, the panic of the first days of the war in the Middle East is gradually subsiding, and suppliers are finding alternative delivery routes.
For now, in any case, so to speak, they note that the changes in, let's say, Urals oil, the oil supplied by the Russian Federation, are practically unnoticeable. So let's wait a little bit. And I still have the feeling that quite soon the situation on the market, so to speak, will calm down. Why? Because on the one hand, there is currently an oversupply of oil on the market. And on the other hand, so to speak, countries are trying to quickly find some alternative, so to speak, routes. If it is not possible to transport oil, so to speak, through the Strait of Hormuz, then, so to speak, certain countries are considering issues related, for example, to shipments through the Red Sea and so on.
The global rise in prices has also affected Ukraine. For example, gas has increased in price by 20% in recent days. Fuel prices have also risen, which has already affected gas stations. At the same time, experts note that the price spike in Ukraine is lower than the European average. Furthermore, the specific timelines for bringing a conclusion to the military conflict against Iran, as officially announced in Washington, provide us with a strong basis to predict that by the very end of this month, the market prices for petroleum-based products will finally begin to decrease significantly.
With that, we conclude our broadcast. We continue right now. Stay tuned for the most up-to-date events so we can be the first to tell you about them. Don't forget to subscribe. See you